Hey garden friends, welcome back to Flower Patch. Today we're going to talk fall garden cleanup and the two different opinions or recommendations that there are for it and what I do in my garden. So let's get rolling. And we're going to talk a little bit about both, and that way you can make a decision that works for you in your garden. You want to start with removing spent annuals and vegetables. Now, you can do that in two ways. Now, one way, you can just pull them up from the roots. Pull them roots and all, and if they're don't have any kind of disease, then go ahead and throw them in the compost bin to compost over winter. Now I just cut off the plants, maybe an inch, maybe two above the soil line, and that helps protect the beneficial microbes in the soil. They have developed a relationship with the roots of the plants that were there all summer long. And to preserve that symbiotic relationship and the microbes, because they cling to it, when you yank them out, you're yanking out everything, and they don't remain in your soil, which you really want. That really benefits your soil health. So it doesn't hurt because those roots are just going to rot anyways. So it'll have you, one school of thought has you clearing out everything, cutting perennials down, disposing of the plant material. But like I said, you don't have to unless there are diseases present, and that could be carried on until the next year. I sheet mulch or sheet compost, and that is, I so many times will cut in increments down the stem to the ground and let it fall to the ground. Many call it the chop and drop method, and that leavings will go ahead and compost in place and feed the soil, feed the microorganisms in the soil, feed the worms through the winter. So you could also, if it's healthy plant material, you could haul it and put it in your compost bin. I have a DIY compost bin that's relatively inexpensive to build if you have basic skills. I am no builder, but I was able to build this compost bin from cedar fence boards. And though I show it surrounded, the whole thing, all the sides having the fence boards, I have since then created a new one where two sides have the fence boards and the other two sides have what's called hardware cloth, which you can find in like a farm supply, like Tractor Supply. Home Depot should have it. I used the 1/2 inch, and that will hold in the debris on the sides. So you can go either way, whichever it makes more economic sense for you. But it works beautifully. And a good compost bin should be like 3 foot by 3 foot size to really get the composting action. So you can compost again, healthy foliage, stems, etc., plant debris that you want to pull out of the garden, or compost it in place. So some perennials that you might want to cut back, hostas. Now hostas is because the leaves, when they cover the ground, and they're quite big leaves, you can harbor slug eggs beneath them. So that's one that you may wish to cut back. Many times I don't get to it before we get first snow, and they're there. I just clean them up in the fall if there's anything left. I mean, in the spring. But that is one that you should consider cutting back. Also phlox, tall phlox, because they can have powdery mildew or something like that, or it will get it over the winter. So that's something else that you would maybe want to cut back. I have more plants listed on my website, on my blog post about the fall cleanup, and you can go over there and check that out. I'll put the link in the description box below. I will leave this through the winter, and even with snow on the ground, these seed pods here, the flower heads that have dried, will feed the birds. It is so fun to see everything covered with snow, these little things sticking up, and the birds eating from them. So this will stay. Now, it will also reseed itself, but I don't want this color here. So what I'll do, come spring, I will dig this up, and then I will get rid of it because I don't want it. And I'll plant or seed some others, or I could seed some right now. I would love to have either the powwow white or the white swan here. And because the hollyhocks, the echinaceas do really well here. Or I may decide to put in some other kind of annual here for bright color. But for now, in my cleanup, fall cleanup, I will leave this for the birds. Some perennials we want to leave, coneflowers, echinacea. I like to leave rudbeckia, and what other things do I leave? Anything that the birds can eat the seeds off of, or things I want to reseed. Like this time I'm leaving gomphrena out in my garden so that maybe it will reseed. I've never had it reseed before, but I've never grown it here, to be truthful. I grew it when I lived in the valley, did beautiful. My plants this year that I started from seed indoors did beautiful. I'm going to let the plant lie, stay there, and hopefully it will reseed as well and come back in place. So mulch your garden beds and put down fresh bark in your pathways. Now, mulching your flower beds helps to protect roots of maybe half-hardy perennials. What I mean by half-hardy is if you are like a zone 5 and the plant you are trying to overwinter is said to be hardy in zones 5 through 9, so you're at the bottom of the hardiness zone, that could be a half-hardy perennial for you, because if you got some freak cold weather that was below the temperature that that plant thrives at or will survive at, then you could have a problem with losing it. Now, that has happened to me. So that's just something you need to be aware of. So those plants that are on the lower spectrum of your zone, or if it's the same, the bottom number of its hardiness zone is the same as your zone, then you will want to give it extra protection, maybe a little extra mulch. Now, I won't use bark mulch, etc., in flower beds that I want the perennials or other, even the annuals that will self-seed. I won't use the mulch there because I want those seeds to hit the soil and then come up the next spring. So that's just something to be mindful of with doing that. Now, in pathways, many times if I don't have my pathway bark mulch available, I will use pine needles that I can rake up around my home. Leaves, I put down a thick layer of leaves that will suppress weeds and keep my feet from getting muddy if I'm walking out there during wet times. And or I will put pathway bark down in the pathways. Now, many times I will put down a layer of free coffee grounds I've gotten from a local coffee shop. I'll put them down a couple inches thick and then put the pathway bark down. That just makes my pathway bark go that much further while putting down a thick enough layer that it really will eliminate or block any weeds that may want to come up. Now, another fall garden chore or fall garden cleanup is pruning trees that have gone dormant. Now, many of them, right now, it's warm. It's the first week of October. It's still so warm here that I cannot prune. You want them to be dormant. So maybe towards the end of fall for me, I can get that job done before snow flies. Here in California, in many areas, regions, the time to prune certain trees, like the fruit trees, etc., is January, because that's when they're fully dormant here, or mostly dormant. And even your maples, etc. But in other areas where it's much colder, you can do it in late fall, and it'll be perfect time. Now remember, some spring flowering shrubs, bushes, and items you don't want to prune because you'll prune off the blooms, and that's lilacs and hydrangeas. You don't want to do that, like the macrophylla, because they bloom on old wood. So you wouldn't want to cut those blooms off by pruning anytime. Those you prune right after they bloom, and then you won't harm next year's bloom. So fallen leaves, a lot of people, well, you should, off of a lawn because it could harm the lawn. But if you have fallen leaves that are falling into garden beds, like flower beds, you don't have to necessarily rake them up. And it's been... Now, just recently I read something from Penn State University, I'm thinking, and it talked about not cleaning up the debris in certain garden beds because certain butterflies, their eggs, their pupae, it overwinters. They are underneath the garden debris. Healthy caterpillars. Now, we're not talking about the pest ones. We're talking about the healthy ones. Now, I rarely clean up all of the debris in my garden. I do not rake it clean. I don't worry about being tidy because we get snows that cover it most of the winter. But I don't have disease and pest problems. And that's because I have really focused my time and energy on soil health and promoting that. And when you have good soil health, your plants will be healthier. You won't have as much pest problems. Now, I did have spider mite problem this year. It was just a hot, dry summer. So, but that's easily mitigated. And really, leaving the debris in the garden is not really the cause of spider mites. Spider mites blow through the air and travel. So it wouldn't have mattered one way or the other. So with your lawn, I don't have a lawn, but with the lawn, you would want to give it a boost for the winter. I like Organic Rev for that because it treats the soil, the roots. It gives them, they can reach down deep. And I'll put a link to that in the description box below. I'll link to the informational post about it, and they explain, and they show pictures of how beneficial it is for lawn care. Now, in lawn, with lawns, you would also overseed, bare patches and things like that. Aerate it. I've seen people walk across it with spiky shoes, or they take a garden fork and, aerate it that way. So that's another. And if you would like to help make it more drought resistant, and this is what I use in one pathway to create a green, I wanted like a grass walkway or pathway instead of bark. I used a micro clover, and it spreads by rhizomes, but it helps to fix nitrogen in your soil. So it's a double win. Drought tolerant, green space, as well as it fixes nitrogen. So try that. Seed your lawn. You see a lot of lawns and grass. Where were we? Oh, we were down at a local winery, had a classic car show. I love classic car shows. And I was noticing as we walked across the green space that it had clover in it, and it was beautiful. So you might want to think about if you're in a super cold area and you have roses and other sensitive plants that might need a little protection, think about how you're going to protect them. There's frost cloth out there. Some people like to use burlap, all those kind of things. I personally chop my roses back in as soon as, the cold weather sets in. Number one, they will not sprout back up or put on green growth if it's cold enough. And it prevents them from getting broken down by the heavy snows we have. That's just what I have to do. This is something I want to urge you right now. A key hint for your garden is to garden for your situation and your climate and your conditions. Love your flowers. Thank you. Did you hear them? Love my flowers. My garden is something that causes people to slow down when they drive by. So anyways, yes, garden for your conditions. And I'll show you something right here that I also cut back that most people tell you not to cut back until spring, but I have to in fall. Over there is my butterfly bush. I'm thinking this year I'm going to move it, but the fall chore I do with it, and this can work with anyone, is I cut it back hard in the late fall, because here we get such heavy snows that it will break it down. And cutting it back, it always comes back from the roots, or it comes back from the stump, whatever you want to call it, and it doesn't no harm. So many will tell you to wait till late winter, early spring, but during that time we're covered with snow. But it damages it so much, our heavy snows, that I must cut it back in the fall. So that's something I really wanted to emphasize, and that is garden for your conditions. You will see generic instructions or people telling you how to do it. They only tell you one way. there are several ways to do mini garden things. And you have to know how plants are going to react in your area. Like with me, the heavy, wet snows we get here in the mountains of Northern California. And that would break down that butterfly bush. It ruins my roses. They break them off. Breaking the limbs or the canes is much more dangerous or health problematic than cutting them off in the late fall. Right now we're having warm weather. If our nights had already cooled down enough, I would have done it already. So it's a good time. Fall, of course, you dig up your dahlias to store them. I do mine in their pots, meaning I plant them out in my garden in their pots. That was to protect them from gophers. But last year, I didn't divide them out or unbury them and store them in the basement like I normally do in pine shavings because I had mice get in there and eat them. And they either shriveled up or they, of course, died from that. So what I did last year, and it worked excellently, was I dug up the entire, I dug them up and put them in pots of soil and put them in my greenhouse. Now, I have warm enough winters. We're 8B as far as zone. Supposedly, I'm supposed to be able to overwinter them in the soil, but I can't because of our heavy snows, wet, heavy snows, that keep the ground too moist too long, they rot. So even though if anybody went by just the zone, they would say you can overwinter them in the ground. I cannot. And that's my local conditions that control that. So I dig them up and, like last year, put them in pots and put them in the greenhouse. Now the greenhouse stays warm enough for them, but they don't get too much water. Also, I have put them in the basement. And that's worked well. So this year I put them in their pots in the garden. They have done beautiful. I'll show you a quick clip of them and how gorgeous they're doing. This is David Howard dahlias. So yeah, just this is the flower that made me fall in love with orange. Tools. During your garden cleanup, you should pay attention to your tools, sharpen them, clean them, oil them up so that they don't rust over the moist winter. Mine are stored either in the basement or my greenhouse, and they can get too moist, and that would cause rust. So to protect them, I oil them up with a 3-in-1 oil, or sometimes I even use just WD-40, something like that, to keep them in prime condition. So take care of your tools and get them ready for next spring. And you may need to use some, during the winter too, but keep them clean. So what about irrigation? Yes, irrigation. I have drip. It sits above the ground. The mulch covers them usually. And I don't get so cold that it freezes solid and cracks. But take a compressor, a compressor if you have one, and then blow out all of your hoses, blow all the water. You want them drained. Now, also, a lot of times I just open up the end caps and I just make sure they drain out so that it doesn't freeze in there and crack them. You should do that a lot of times if you have where you get really, really low temperatures. That would also be good to do with your in-ground irrigation system. Also, your hoses. If you just have water hoses, then you need to make sure you empty them, store them out of the weather, and that will make them last much, much longer. Now, I have the retractable hoses. Last year, I did not drain my hose link, and the spray nozzle busted, and a couple of links. And thankfully, when I bought it, they sent some extras of that. Probably happens to a lot of people. And I was able to replace it really easily. But this year, I'm going to be mindful, watch the temperatures. When it's going to be getting down to freezing, I will make sure I disconnect it. Fortunately, the whole body of it lifts up, and I can put it in the basement, and I can put out an extra, throwaway hose out there if I need a hose out there at that time, because it could be before snow flies that I may need a hose for some reason. So that's something to think about. Protect your hoses. Also, I have those like 4 valves where you hook it to your hose bib and you have 4 valves on it. That needs to come off too, because I've had those crack in the winter weather, especially the plastic ones. I've even had the brass ones do it, so it doesn't matter. Get those put away for winter. So during your garden cleanup, it's really a good time to look around, survey your garden. Hopefully you took pictures or videos like I have. Try to impress upon you that it really goes far in helping you plan for the next year. You can go and review those. You think, okay, that didn't work there. I'm going to move it over here. Oh, I'd like to do more of this. So you can kind of survey, like the one flower bed in my entrance garden, all the plants got too tall. It hid the flower bed behind, even though the behind flower bed is taller. So I will make sure I'm on top of things for next spring when I'm putting plants out. Also, I could seed that area with things that I think would come up that I want to seed or have germinate in place. This is a good time to collect seeds if you haven't already been collecting them all along, and spread them in areas that you want them to come up, those plants that will reseed for you. I see many people, like for cool flowers, cool annuals, even perennials, they're starting them in pots or 6-packs. You don't have to do that usually. I just put them directly in the area that I want them to germinate and grow in, and they come up beautifully. You don't have any transplant shock. You don't have to try to take care of them over the winter. You don't have to harden them off. They just are so hardy, they will come up in place and work great for you. So it's also a good time to order seeds if you have something before the big rush. If there's something that you're eyeing, now some places may be out of that particular seed. You usually can get on a wait list. They'll inform you when they get it in. Like me right now, I have some orange gomphrena I want to order, some more orange snapdragons. I have some. There's some more what I do is I heavily seed. If it's something I'm not sure is going to come up on its own in the flower bed, I will order a packet to spread in the garden and a packet to start indoors if the ones I direct sowed don't work. So what about your container gardens? Now, sensitive plants could be in your containers, and I'll share with you one of mine. Now over here is one of my geraniums I got on the bargain rack at Lowe's. I did a video on dividing them out because there was 3 in one pot. And I have where I planted them in containers. I'll show you the beautiful containers. They're still doing gorgeous. But I'm going to keep an eye for, this is about, fall cleanup in the garden. This is something that is part of my fall chores. And that would be to I'll keep an eye on the nighttime temperatures. And I will then prep this to overwinter it. Now, I have a video on 4 different ways you can overwinter them. I have found for me the most successful is to bring it inside the house and to keep it in a bright windowsill all winter long. I've tried them in the basement where I just put the whole thing in the basement, check it through the winter, make sure it's got a little bit of moisture. I'm sorry. You can go watch the video on the 4 ways that I have overwintered these pelargonium geraniums, zonal geraniums, and how you can too. You can pick one and see which one works best for you. But for me, taking it indoors, and it'll even bloom, because these are not, they don't bloom according to how much light it gets. A lot of plants do. And if you have it in a very bright window, it won't go dormant. And I also have grow lights in my office that I could put these under, and they would continue to bloom through the winter. So that's a plus if you want to try to do that. But that's one of my fall chores. Keep an eye on the temperatures. We've been exceptionally warm. When it gets down below the 50s or to the low 50s, I will clean this up and take it indoors. You can watch that video, and I share with how I clean them up and make sure I'm not taking pests into the house. And other containers. Now, if there's other sensitive plants you may be able to overwinter. If you collect up those containers and put them up against the house, wrap the base in burlap, or things like that to protect them, I have an porch overhang where I do put some plants to overwinter underneath there, and it's against the house, and it just gives it a little bit more protection than it would if it's out in the garden. So that's one way you can prepare your containers during your fall cleanup. You may want to pull out those container plants, prune them back, pot them up into smaller pots that you can overwinter, maybe in a basement garage, or if you have a little greenhouse. Mine's unheated, but sometimes it gives enough protection that will work. And when it gets the winter sun, then it'll warm up enough to keep them alive for you. So you don't have to buy them again next year. Some you can bring in and put on your windowsill like I am with the geraniums. So if you empty some containers, clean them up, store them where they won't get all mildewy and what have you. They'll be ready. They'll be ready for you to jumpstart in spring. The one camp is you must clean up for a healthier garden. Clean up, you rake everything, you haul it away, or you compost it somewhere else, whatever. Then the other side is leave it in place. And that will help the soil health, plant health, and good, I don't want to say pests, or beneficial insects. So you choose what works for you and what you think creates a more healthier garden. Now, some people, it's aesthetics. They want the pristine clean during winter, and that's okay. For me, a lot of times I chop back different perennials and annuals, and then I mulch and that hides the debris while feeding the soil. So those are really the two camps there are. Now, as I said, the one where you do the total cleanup, rake it clean, is because people believe it causes diseases and protects pests. But that's not always the case. If you don't have a problem with diseases or pests, then go right ahead and don't worry about doing a super duper fall cleanup. And you might be surprised next spring how beneficial it's been. So those are your two choices. I leave it up to you. But know that you need to garden for your situation, your climate, and your conditions. All right, I'll see you in my next video.